when we're talking about security, most people who aren't in the cloud, if your business is not online yet, it's not a digital business, you're going to tend to think that security is a project or is a technology you buy. But if you look at this reference architecture, this is our reference architecture of how a business should live in the cloud. And if you look at this, security actually encapsulates everything, encapsulates workflow, it encapsulates all the departments, all the systems that tie into the departments, all the training, all the data. So there are two things that are really important in a digital business. It's security, and the other is a single source of truth. So what do we mean by a single source of truth? It means what data you're measuring the business is the same in your finance systems as is in your operating systems, as in your marketing systems, and so that you know what the business is actually measured on, right? Regardless of what department you're in. And so those two things need to be top of mind when you're building a business on the internet. Next slide, please. So why is it important for executives to know this and to be involved in a digital transformation? Well, yeah, the days of IT just being a support arm is like 1990s, 2000s, right? We're way past that now. So now as an executive, you've got to look at technology as a way to increase your enterprise value. We're talking doubling, tripling, quadrupling your exit, right? We advise a lot of companies that are, been around for 15 years and are moving into digital formats. But we also advise companies that are in their Series C, Series D. We don't know of one company that's in Series C or D that is not focused on technology as its core business function. None. And so, now that we're in the age of, advanced data applications, artificial intelligence, automation, digitizing your workforce, all of these things are actually going to increase the value of your business. It's not just a support function anymore, right? And so, a lot of what we're talking about today is so important for CEOs and CFOs to be involved in. And, we've been getting a lot of requests by the bosses of our CIOs that we support around these two topics, and these conversations always end up in some sort of enterprise valuation discussion. Next slide, please. So when you're talking about a digital transformation, another big fallacy is that they think it's a project that you throw onto the IT team or the marketing team or whatnot. This is digital transformation. The way we look at it, it's like climbing Mount Everest. This is not something that just a department goes through. Your entire company is going through a digital transformation, and it's climbing Mount Everest. When we go help companies through it, the last thing our clients want is just a report for them to follow. You have to be in there in the trenches with them. It's like when you're climbing Mount Everest, you can read a book on it, but when you're in there at ground zero climbing up, well, yeah, you better have a guide with you if you really want to survive the trip. And so, when we talk about digital transformation, we're talking about challenges that every C-level is going to experience, and this includes the CEO, unfortunately. And you have to look at it as a company-wide project. And so, we're talking about priority setting from a company-wide level, starting from the top all the way down, because a lot of those priorities are going to change. A lot of the culture is going to change. The C-level is going to be involved in practical problem solving. This isn't something that you can just expect people from the ground up to figure out. Sometimes you have to get involved. Challenging the establishment, hey, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. This is how it's always been. You need to challenge those things because it doesn't behave that way in the internet. You have to be a lot more responsive. You got to let your customers in. You have to let market demand in and respond to it very quickly, because they're clicks of buttons now. Problem predicting, you don't want to deal with not having the right equipment, halfway through the climb to Mount Everest. You got to predict when you're going to need what, right? And so, a lot of our competitive, consulting companies, they focus on problem solving. The way you look at it is, if you're solving a problem in digital transformation, it's probably a little too late, right? You should have predicted that along the way. And then breaking silos, it's common. It's the most common thing, and it's the biggest complaint. Those silos existed because that's how it served the company before. Those silos don't work in the internet. It's you have to break those in order to create the velocity you need in the business. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about digital transformation, there's a typical way to do it, and there's another way to do it that gets a lot faster traction. So the typical way to do it is to do it in siloed projects, and you break them up, and you have each department do their projects, and you regroup, every quarter, every year, and that's the typical way of doing it. But that creates a lot of rework. And that's the reason why people think that digital transformations take 2 to 5 years, sometimes 8 years. That's why. But if you take a swarming approach, and the swarming approach includes a lot of collaboration, breaking silos, cross-functional team meetings, right? Stacking projects together, not in a linear format, but on top of each other. When you do swarming, we've seen up to 75% savings in the timeline of a digital transformation. We're talking transformations that people were thinking would take 2 to 3 years, done in months, right? But done in quarters and months. And so there is a way to do it. Security is one of those things that you need to stack in the digital transformation. Otherwise, you're going to go back and redo a bunch of things. Security needs to be involved in data. It needs to be involved in workflow, between the systems, in the cloud, on your network infrastructure, and all of that. And so while you're tackling all of these projects with different departments, you need to wrap security around all those things. And so very important to do that. Next slide, please. So, when we talk about breaking silos and tackling all these projects together in a stacked fashion, what that leads to is a report like this. And we get a lot of like, what is that? When we present this to clients and even other consulting firms, they're not used to seeing it this way. But when you stack a bunch of projects together and a lot of workflows together and departments and cross-functional, a lot of the CIOs that have been born in the cloud, they don't look at the silos, right? Because they don't look at it that way. They look at it like this. These are mega processes of a business. This in particular is a consumer product goods business. But everyone, whether you're in IT, security, operations, marketing, finance, doesn't matter. Everyone looks at it this way, right? Should look at it this way, because ultimately the technology is there to help these workflows and enable the people. And so, this is the way, once you get through stacking these projects and then looking at it from a digital lens for the business, and you look at it from a business lens of the digital world, this is how it looks like. And so let's take an example of a digital transformation that Brett's led. Brett, CFO of Mobscene, again, a lot of experience in finance, executive management, various different companies, very large companies that we all know about. He's led a digital transformation at Mobscene as the CFO. I want to stay here on this slide, Brett. For your digital transformation, what were some of the mega processes that were involved?
Thanks, Henry. I think to kind of speak to my experience at Mobscene, almost all of these, even though this is a consumer product example, were still present in Mobscene. We were concerned about How do we hire employees? How do we onboard to offboard them, and why? How do we work with our suppliers? Even going back to what Bob and Jim had mentioned, we use Cisco, we use Microsoft, we use all those things. Okay, how do they play in our space? We get into our customer service, our sales, our from order to cash, all the way through that project management. We had to lay it all on the table. You're not going to transform your company by taking baby steps. You really have to look at this, understand it. And equally important to that is make sure you assign it the right colors. Like as you have in this chart, are the reds really the highest priorities that need the most significant impacts? Are the yellows in the middle? Where are the greens? What do we think is okay? Is it truly okay? And from that, you can then start to actually transform. If you don't understand that, you're just kind of, you're repainting the door, if you will, versus remodeling the house, Right. And so for us is we sort of disguised it, if you will, as an ERP implementation, but it gave us access to all parts of the business, from the sales, the project management, cash flow, hiring and firing of people, all that inside an ERP, but it got us to this. And I think that's what's really helped Mobscene go from, a very successful, strong, creative organization to what I was hired to do a number of years ago. And I think you mentioned this earlier, come to Mobscene and increase the enterprise value of this company. We're really good at what we do, but we want to increase that value. And this was the first thing that we looked at. Let's start to transform this business, because we can't do it doing it the same way we've always done it.
Yeah, your story is really interesting because, a lot of CFOs are focused on finance numbers, but you've touched, so many different mega processes for your business. What are some of the KPIs that you could talk about, that you were involved in that typically just from a financial lens, people wouldn't really see?
Well, I think one of the big ones that certainly helped us, and why we kind of disguise this as an ERP, is like many finance organizations, it takes you a couple weeks to close your books, then you have to report on it, then you meet with management teams, you eventually go to the board, and now, we're back into closing again. By starting with ERP, we collapsed our close schedule from, call it a month, to about 2.5 days. So, we're sitting here on the 9th of March. We've already done our management meetings for February. The board will have their stuff this afternoon. And the nice part about it, to your question, so I'm done with the finance part. The accounting part's done for the month. I now get to go play in IT. I get to go play in ops and sales and just about anywhere else I want to, because I can come back to this slide as, hey, look, we've identified, planning and forecasting as a red bucket. Let's have a meeting, discuss, are we transforming it? Is it flipping to yellow or green?
Brett, that's not always a good thing for the CIOs that the CFO is dabbling in IT. So I just want to point that out in defense of my comrades. But I do think a good place for the CFO to get involved is understanding the value of the data now that they can analyze and look at future directions for the company and advise the company on where to go in terms of improvements based on the data that's now more available to you. So I'd be interested to hear how you think about that.
I don't know if I want to tell you, Jim, if you don't like me playing in your space, why should I give you my secrets? But you hit on a very good point, and what Henry kind of started the section on, that single point of truth, those key metrics are what you're looking at, that running the IT at JPL, the same thing the finance organizations look at, the same thing the sales organizations look at, say, okay, we know what our numbers are, we know where we're supposed to be. And equally important, again, we know why we're not there. Why is there a variance to that? So, at least in Mobscene, which is very much a creative professional service type organization, I eat and breathe timesheets, utilization, who's on projects, how long do things take, how much extra bandwidth do I have in the system, where do I need to reinforce systems, resources, people, et cetera, where do I need to take away from? And and all the managers see that. Everyone said that is the utilization numbers. That's how we calculate. That's how we look at it. That's what our tolerances are. And whether you're in sales, IT, ops, HR, you can see that information. And that's helped us know, okay, look, we're picking up speed or we're slowing down. Oh, this group is surging, this group is falling back. And it's given that level of transparency and texture that we all believe it, we know it, we can now make a better business decision off of it.
Let's touch on some of the challenges that you've faced. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, what were some of the challenges you faced? What were the challenges that your previous CFO faced that you broke? How long was the previous CFO working on this transformation? How fast were you able to do it? What were some of the challenges that you've faced and conquered along the journey?
I mean, I think this slide lays it out very nicely. I mean, because really, I came in as a new CFO to increase enterprise value, to change really what the company was, which is right there in the yellow, challenge the establishment. Coming from the outside and say, okay, hey guys, let me understand what's going on. Let me understand where the issues are and how do we start going about fixing it. And in order to do so, you need to get involved in the culture. You need to get social currency. You need to be part of the organization and get that trust. You need to sit there and say, hey, from the company perspective, what's important? Company-wide, this is why it's important. And then go to, Jim and his IT tower and say, look, your priorities are second tier right now because the company really needs to do this first. And getting him to see that, agree it, understand it, and ultimately support it. So now you go, okay, great. Jim's going to be my ally as we start to transform the company. And he might have a way to look at problems that I can't see. But now I'm starting to build my swarm team. I'm starting to get that momentum. I'm getting the right people involved that I can then start to move on this stuff. If I did it all behind a closed door, I'd be back in that linear model you had. It looked very evolutionary. It takes decades upon centuries to evolve versus, okay, a swarm can happen in a couple of weeks, a couple of months. So for us, as we did our ERP, it's kind of started our tech stack from scratch, and we're done in about 4 months. So, and then for us,
how long was your previous predecessor working on it?
I want to say it was probably about 1.5 years, and never really got like the traction. Didn't have some of these things. I don't think it did what this slide lays out to tell us to do. Predict the problems. Okay, well, do you know what the red and yellow slide are saying? Do you know what questions to ask? Do you have the right people on your team to help with that process?
Okay,
I feel like I need to give Jim some.
He wants a rebuttal. Can you mute people on this?
It's probably not it's probably not a rebuttal as much as we would be so far ahead at that point in terms of what we think needs to be transformed anyway, because IT gets to see it all. Mm-hmm. So I think the real key is creating that partnership that says, we could really impact this area and then be focused on that, like you said, and get it done in a timely manner. I so happen to agree, these projects that go on and on and on and never end, never do end. And so having a champion in the C-suite that really helps the IT organization focus and get the resources it needs to accomplish what needs to be done, that is really part of the panacea of a good working relationship. And the company does look at when the C-suite works together. People do watch that. The biggest question, though, I would ask you, Brett, is culture is sometimes one of the hardest things to change in a company. Even an internet company, cultures get defined pretty quickly. And I'm wondering your experience in overcoming cultural things that also need to come along while the good culture and changing the bad culture if you can.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think, like you mentioned, IT touches everything, but so does finance, so does HR, and fortunately, in a company our size, I get to play in all those spaces. And it's been really important, again, using this as sort of like the tool was to, spend time with the sales team and say, okay, what do you do? How does this work? And actually a very short story as well. When I started at Mobscene, I actually spent about 2 hours or so with the head of one of our departments in my office. And my office actually has a window that you can see into my office to see who's in there. Great conversation. Like I said, about 2 hours long. As the manager left and walked back to his office on the other side of the building, he got stopped by 3 people asking if he was okay. I'm like, he's like, why? He's like, there's no reason you would be in the CFO's office for 3 hours unless you were just getting just ripped apart or whatever it was. And this guy's like, no. It's like, he asked me how I run my team. What are my pain points? What do I think of the company? What do I think of, what do we need to address? What are the priorities in my mind? And he listened, and that really starting my process in the culture. Okay, I can go and meet with you. This isn't big bad, C-suite coming down, to do whatever. They say, hey, look, I want to partner with you. I want to hear your perspectives. I want to be involved and make this better for you and ultimately for the company. So,
yeah, I think if I can just jump in like really quick, it's in these situations, this is really your competitive advantage. Being consultants, we can go into 30 companies and we might find one company like this that is collaborating. And if you can break down those barriers and get them working together and get them working as a team, that is your competitive advantage.
Agreed.
Good, all good comments, guys. Just quick time check. It's 12:50. Want to make some time for Q&A. Can we go to the next slide, please? We talked a lot about the swarming. Brett, I don't think we need to cover this. The next slide. Can you talk about how security was involved in your digital transformation?
Yeah, sure. I'll make it brief. Now we have to kind of move on. Just like what Bob and Jim started with, I mean, we're a smaller company. We rely on a number of trusted suppliers, people that have access to our systems. We then also house data for studios, and you mentioned Netflix and movies and all this kind of stuff. Security lives at the front of the mind. It has to. There's too much at stake not to. And so as we were looking at this, okay, how do we do this while still being as secure, if not more secure than we were before we did it? And that became a very big piece in the ERP, in the data, in the KPIs, in the communication, et cetera. It has to be secure. And as we're vetting the solutions that we're thinking of, that was always like the leading question. How secure is this? Why is it secure? Do we believe it's secure? And then we would do the same thing. I think Jim and Bob are referencing. Let's go talk to some of our other suppliers, customers, competitors even. What do you think of these solutions? Are they vetted? Do they know the right people? Do we have the right stuff? Great. Let's kind of work together on this, because just like any of the other companies, if something like that were to happen to us, then we're out of business. So it's a life or death kind of decision for us.
Security isn't just a technology issue. It's just risk management. The general counsel needs to be involved, CEO needs to be involved, CFO needs to be involved. Everyone needs to. We're going to transition this over to Billy. When we talk about security, it's not just about the tech, right? And so, Billy, do you mind giving us a rundown of how to translate the security into business talk?
Yeah, so absolutely. So my goal in this talk is really to get you to understand that security needs to understand what is important to the business. And conversely, the business needs to understand what's important for security. The concept security by design is about considering tactics and security patterns from the beginning. Every aspect of your business is going to have data that is valuable and essential, and you may not even be aware of all of it. So mapping it all out from the start with that beautiful red and yellow chart we saw earlier is absolutely essential. But secure by design really isn't just about software. The principles are incorporating security and risk management and best practices into everything: building, designing, transforming, integrating, all of these things. Securing software and data and handling these integrations in a secure way needs to be efficient and painless as well, though. And the only way that you can really do that is to start tackling it and considering it from the start. A couple of things to consider. We've had some great speakers. Brett already mentioned company-wide priority setting and knowledge mapping. That's absolutely essential. You need to know what you've got. Bob also talked about that a bit. And then Bob really started giving some great examples of secure by design, where he talked about pre-planning for an eventual breach. The negotiating contracts, again, brilliant. Having canned PR responses. That might sound mundane, but being able to push out an email immediately to all the people who may respond instantly is essential. So anyway, so we'll get to the slide here. When you talk to your tech and security leaders, you can ask them, tell me how are we securing our data assets? And what you're going to want to hear is that your security team understands the criticality of your data, whether it's employee data, customer data, product data. You've probably heard the term checkbox security. And if you look at this left-hand column here, that checkbox security isn't necessarily bad. It's just not complete. I think I've got time for a quick sort of imaginary story, because I see Jim, and so I need to be able to make a space story. Imagine if when they were building the space shuttle, they thought, okay, we have this giant hunk of metal coming back into orbit. We're going to hit some thick atmosphere. It's going to get really hot. Let's cover this whole thing in heat shielding. Well, if they really just said, okay, heat shielding, check, they may have spent a lot of time thinking, okay, here are the windows, here are the flexi bits up at the top. How do we heat shield that? And they would have ended up with fewer resources to consider what's really important, which is the bottom. So that bottom is going to get really hot. Let's focus on that. So again, it's not bad to say, okay, we've got heat shielding, but it could lead to a situation where you focused on the wrong point. So this is kind of a worksheet to help you with a jumping point. It's not complete. I can talk through these briefly, but some answer that you want to hear would be, you know what, we maintain this list of assets that you saw. We've classified all of our data, the risk, the priority, the value. We understand the flows and the access points. We continually update all of this information. We know why we're encrypting stuff and where. And so those are a number of the things. And again, checkbox security and security by design they're buzzwords. But when it comes down to it, you want to actually be able to have a discussion where you can talk about some of these deeper things, as opposed to you say, oh, you know what, we've got in firewall, we've got encryption, we've got antivirus, single sign-on, we're good. Or where I'm going to lead into Nicole here, it's handled by the service provider.